All right, I'm trying to get this all set up. We're going to see if this works. I am trying to connect to YouTube, and I really don't want to watch myself. So I'm now going to close that window, and hopefully that'll work. Okay. So, oh, let me bring up the chat box as well. Um, yeah, so if while we're doing this, if you have any questions that pop up, by all means, please feel free to type in the Zoom chat box, and I will periodically look at those to make sure that there aren't any questions I can answer. And I don't see myself, and that is absolutely fine, but I feel like I should kind of know that I'm at least in the picture. But of course, I don't know how to do that right now. So I'm just, I guess, not going to worry about it. The joys of technology, right? Oh, here we go. Yay. All right, so welcome everyone. As most of you know, I am a huge fan of the music of Bach. And I mean, I like lots of other composers as well, but I am very partial to Bach. And I think one of the reasons that is because I love puzzles. Like I love doing jigsaw puzzles, word puzzles, all that type of thing. And to me, Bach is the quintessential puzzler of the music world. So I know he had a very mathematical mind. I find that intriguing. And math, of course, also a lot of math is puzzles. So I think that's what draws me to it. Um, okay, so the tricky thing, well, and what I should also say at this point is that fugues are kind of the epitome of complexity in Bach's music. So if you want to have a challenge, play a Bach fugue, learn a Bach fugue. I think a lot of people stay away and are hesitant to do that because of the complexity of it. And I think there are horror stories about having memory slips and Bach fugues, and they're just tricky. But I definitely want to say I think all pianists should experience learning a Bach fugue and enjoying a Bach fugue at some point in their life, because it's a different challenge, and it's a fun challenge. In order to, I think, approach a fugue in a way that's not quite as intimidating, I think it's important to understand the basic building blocks that make up a fugue. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about those building blocks so that hopefully when you go to approach a fugue or an invention or a sinfonia, you will have an idea of what you should be looking for and what makes the piece so special. And I think then you'll see it more as a journey versus what typically happens with young musicians, which is you get a fugue and you slog through it note by bloody note. And it can be really painful. It can hurt your head. It can be discouraging. Not exactly what we want. Okay, so before we continue, I want to point out that in the chat box, I have attached two files. One is the score to a Bach invention that we're going to walk through first. And then there's also a PDF of the two fugues that I would like to also look at after that. So you can refer to that, or I have it on the screen as well. So hopefully this technology is all working the way I'm hoping it is. All right, so we're going to actually start by looking at one of Bach's inventions. And this is the first one in C major because I wanted to make sure I could play it. And the reason I wanted to start with an invention is because they tend to be a little more straightforward. They are also less dense in texture, so it's a lot easier to hear what's going on. Now, some of you may have performed this. If you've performed it, go ahead and you can write that in the chat box. Uh, The main thing that we're going to look at here in this invention is you have, and I'm going to kind of use my cursor on the music that should be showing on your screen to highlight this. So the main thing that is in all fugues and in inventions are what is called the subject. I personally don't like that term subject because it sounds very academic, and I stay away from academic terms as much as possible. I use the term golden nugget, but anyway, the subject. So the subject is really crucial, and it is what starts out every invention and every fugue. So in this C major invention, here is what the subject sounds like. All right, so to me, what that subject is made up of is a little scale going up, and then some skipping thirds that go all the way back down to C. So you end up where you started. Right? But it's much more interesting than... My dog is coughing. My apologies. Just ignore it. So up, and then kind of toggle back down. Then you go up to sol or G, and then you jump up. So this subject is outlining the C major scale. Very simple, right? And that's one of the beautiful things in Bach, is that he can take something absolutely so simple and beautiful and give it elegance and grace. Okay, so you start out with it in the right hand, and then it passes to the left hand, and then again in the right hand, left hand, right? So this is very different than like a piece by Mozart, right? In Mozart, your left hand would probably be just giving you an accompaniment part, and then the right hand would be giving you this subject. So maybe something like this. And I'm going off of Dr. Cataldi's improv little thing he did. I watched it, so I'm trying to use what he taught in that. So here would be a la Mozart. Okay, that's kind of nice. But when you do what Bach did, which is you have these interspersing of the subject, and they're sort of piled on, not piled, but they're exchanging, right? To me, it creates this amazing conversation between the two hands. Dog singing again. I love that, right? Because in so much of the piano music that we play, the left hand is like, ah, yeah, whatever. And the right hand is, yes, I am the queen. In Bach, that is not the case. So if you want to develop your left hand and really refine it, play Bach. Okay, so then if you move on past those four statements of the subject, Bach does the coolest thing, but again, it's so simple, but glorious. So if you look in the third measure, right here, if you look starting on the 16th, the second 16th note, and compare it to the subject. So here at the beginning of the subject, you ascend 4 notes, right? Look at this. You descend 4 notes. And then you go down a third in the subject, but here you go up a third, okay? This is called the inversion of the subject, or the inverted subject. So he flips everything upside down. Ah, so cool. So this is what that sounds like. Well, first here's the subject to remind you. Now here's the inverted subject. Now to me, just by flipping it, you get a very different musical sense. When you've got the subject and it has that ascending line, to me, it just is like this burst of energy. It's almost like a rocket going up and then back down. With the inverted subject, to me, it's almost like a sigh. Yeah. And then after that, he just develops that. He does it 3 times in the right hand. There's 1, 2, a 3rd time, a 4th time, right? Meanwhile, the left hand is just kind of accompanying. Really beautiful. And because he repeats that 4 times and he's coming down the scale, that tells me musically, gives me an idea of what I could do interpretively to make it interesting. Instead of playing it all the same dynamic, what am I going to do? I'm going to diminuendo coming down. Yeah? So let me start from the beginning again and kind of piece that all together. So here we go. So here's the subject. Farther. So it's really a lovely way of having a rise and a fall. So it's like he uses the inverted subject to bring us back down pitchwise. All right, I have a little note here. Hudson is saying, I think we're not seeing the invention on the screen. Oh dear. That is very strange, and I wonder why that is. Is that true for everybody else? I guess there's only one other person watching right now. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing it and then try it again. Hold on, folks. Okay. Okay, let's try it again. And then I have to show the chat again. Okay, can I get some feedback? Do you guys see it now? Perfect. Yay, success. Thank you, you guys. Okay, so yeah, let me just play it one more time since we now have it on the screen. So, subject. Again. This is the inverted subject, 3rd time, 4th time. Now the left hand has the subject again. Oops. Now inverted subject. Okay. Very simple. Very, this does not take a rocket scientist really to put it together, except, how many people did inventions? I don't know. So that's the basic thing. I think that's all I really wanted to say about this invention. Let me go ahead. I wish I could fit it all on one screen. I don't think I can. No. So what I want to do is I'm going to play through it. You can follow along as much as you can. And then, but when you're listening, what I want you to hear is sort of the ping pong effect that this type of writing gives you. Your ears should be drawn from the left hand, right hand, left hand, sometimes both hands at once. But this is part of the magic of Bach. forgot to mention before I did that, that I want to point out, because this is going to carry into our investigation of fugues, is that in between statements of the subject, sometimes you'll get a longer stretch that is not necessarily just the subject or the inverted subject. So it's sort of like a big long sequence. Let's see, where was one of the first ones? I'm using a different score, so it's hard to find. Well, even like, let's see, it's in measure 11 here. Hopefully it's up on your screen. So it is the inverted subject, but he does it the repeated times. That is sometimes also called an episode. And after you've had a section where you have this dialogue going on between the two voices, and you've got subject in one hand, subject in the other, then you've got a longer line like I just did in the episode. It gives the music a different feel. And so that puts the audience on this different journey, and they feel like, oh, now we're really going somewhere. And then you get plopped back into the subject again, or the inverted subject. And then the audience goes, aha, I recognize that again. We all like to recognize what we're hearing, okay? And I think sometimes the complaint with people listening to Bach performances, especially fugues, is that the audience who might not know Bach very well would say, I get so lost in it, I don't know what to listen to. It's because there's a lot going on. So as the performer, what we need to do is we need to be aware of that. And that's why we want to know at all times, where's that subject? We want to make sure we voice everything. We want to voice whenever that subject comes in, make sure that that voice is coming out loud and clear, so that the audience can have that sense of familiarity and can say, aha, there's the subject. And then it will keep them engaged versus having them go, this Bach stuff is heavy. Oh my gosh. Okay. So, so there you go. So there's our little introduction. Now hang onto your hats. I'm going to now stop sharing this one. And now I'm going to share, we're going to move on to fugues. That is not the fugue. All right. Okay, I'm going to need to get some feedback from you all again. You should be seeing a fugue now on the screen. Yay, I think we've got it. Okay. So what we have is the C minor fugue, and this is from Book 2 of his Well-Tempered Clavier. This is one of my favorites because it is chock full of just about everything you would need to know about a fugue. And so it's lots of fun. So let's look at the beginning here. Just as with the invention, we're going to have one voice start out. And that voice is, in this case, the, let's see. Okay, first, sorry. Let's start off by saying this is a 4-voice fugue. And my dog is having major issues here. I'm so sorry. Okay, we're just going to ignore this again. Churro, can you lay down? He's looking at me funny. Okay, 4-voice fugue. And this first entrance is, I believe, the tenor. All right, and here it is at the beginning. Here is what this subject sounds like. Okay, so it's a pretty short subject. I would say this is one of his shorter subjects. And it also spans a pretty limited range. It spans a 5th, okay? A lot of times he'll go much more expansive. But this is, again, you know, Bach is so much about simplicity. So, again, you start on the 5th and you go back up to it. Uh-oh. And then back up to the F and down to the E flat. Very simple. Sorry, guys. Churro, I need you to lay down. The joys of filming from home, right? So after you got the statement of the subject in the alto, it's going to come in the, sorry, it's the tenor voice. Then it comes in the soprano. Right? While the soprano, I'm really like out of it today. While the alto is playing the subject, the left hand or the tenor part is continuing. So that's how that works. Now, after that, the statement of the first two subjects, we're going to get what we call an episode. We talked about the episode a little bit in the invention, right? So it's sort of, I like to think of it as a ligament that connects the subjects together. So after you have the second subject in the right hand, so here there's no subject. So that's the episode. It's very small. Then here in the bass, we have the subject again. Right? So that's the third entrance. We've had three voices come in now. Now we have another episode. So this is to get us to the next subject. Right? Now bass. Okay, we're going to stop there. Because at this point, all of the voices have had their entrances. Okay, yeah, I've been speaking wrong in terms of which voices are which. I apologize. It's hard to do this technology and everything all at once. But I don't think it really matters a whole lot, as long as you see where the different subject entries are. But let me point them out. So now that I think I've got it right. Yes. Okay. This first entrance, I believe, is actually the alto. So I use the designations that one would use in a choir. So alto. The second entrance, I believe, is the soprano entry. The third subject entry is the tenor. And then down here, the final entrance is the bass part. And I love to think of it in terms of the choir parts because I like to think of the different timbres that you get with those different voice parts. So, you know, on a keyboard, it's so easy to think, oh, everything has the same timbre, it's the same sound, same color. But I strive to do something different. So that, for instance, when this bass subject comes out right here, it should be really rich and warm, because that will give it a good depth to it. All right, now I want to say something about episodes. Sorry, I'm distracted because there's too much on the screen. In an episode, one thing to always be looking for is to figure out what is that episode built upon. Usually episodes are a bit of, I kind of consider them like a playground for Bach. So oftentimes what he will do is he'll take like a little sliver of the subject, or sometimes what's known as the counter subject, which is not always in existence, and I'm probably not going to talk about it today, but he takes something that he's already introduced to us and he elaborates on it. He riffs on it. He improvises on it. He'll take us on a sequence and go through a harmonic journey just using that motive or a combination of motives. So when I look at this first episode in the third measure, it's a very short episode, right? But I think there's a couple things that he's playing around with. Largely, we've got this interval of a fourth. So in the right hand, and this fifth, right? So a fourth followed by a fifth. Well, if you look back in the subject, you've got a fifth and a fourth. So even though, again, this is a very brief episode, he is extracting something from the subject and utilizing it to create this ligament in between the statements of the subject. Okay. The other little thing I think he's pulling out from the subject is that this subject kind of outlines a descending mini scale from G to F to E flat. So here's the G, F, E flat. Okay? Look here in the episode. So it's kind of like he's exposing that skeleton, which I think is really clever. Okay? So that is pretty cool. So let me play it from the beginning to the end of that first episode and see if you can kind of recognize those things. You heard a little bit of that. I am leaving out some of the ornaments and that type of thing because they're not as crucial, and I think sometimes they get in the way of hearing that skeleton that we're working with. Let's see. Here, okay, let's look at the second episode that comes up. And let's look at this, because this is part of what you want to do when you're working on a fugue. So when you're looking at this episode, what's it all about? Well, I see a lot of 16th notes compared to the first line, yeah? And I see some scalar motion. Starts in the left hand. Churro. Sorry. Churro, come here. Come here. One moment. Lay down. You need to lay down. You're getting to know my dog. Okay, so back to the episode. Lay down, please. No barking. He doesn't like me sometimes. Stop it. Okay. You have the 16th note scale that also repeats, yeah? And then it's going to be taken up in the right hand, right here. And then he flips it on its head, right? Okay, so that's one aspect that's important in this episode. Then another important aspect comes in at the end. My dog. Okay, if you look at the left hand, this little gesture here, then it's also done in another voice here. I think that comes from the... Oh my gosh, one moment. Okay. Oh my gosh. So... And now my husband is home. This is just a lot of fun. Let's just hold for a second. Oh my gosh. If you guys have any questions, now would be a really good time to type them in. Hey, Tad, I'm trying to do a live stream talk and he's barking up a storm. So, I don't know. I don't know. Just deal with it. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so here's what this episode sounds like. So when you hear this episode, really listen for the rising scales at first between the left hand and the right hand, and then also listen for the at the end. You have this dialogue between the two inner voices. So here we go. Okay, isn't that a beautiful episode? So I think that's important to really connect with. Those different aspects that make up that episode and make it what it is. Okay. So, and I should add that that episode is a little bit longer, right? And I think that's important because that extra length actually helps to increase the tension before the entrance of the bass part that's about to come in. Okay. So let's go ahead and I'm going to now play the entrance of the first 4 subjects, including those episodes, and see if you can kind of go on that journey with me, hearing all those different things, the subjects and the episodes. Yeah, so pretty cool how that all builds up. That's called, sometimes called the exposition of the fugue. Exposition is made up of all the subjects have made their statement of the subject. Okay. Hudson, I see your question and I'm going to answer that in just a little bit. So thank you for that question. All right, moving on into the fugue, we have something very interesting that comes up. After we've had that statement of the bass part with the subject, you have this little, what I call a subject variation in the soprano. It's not exactly the way it is in the opening. He adds a little bit of a different rhythm. So instead of the straight 8th notes, he does 1 and 2 and. Okay, so that's just good to note. It's sometimes easy to pass over those and to not necessarily see it as the subject, but it is the subject. And some other time I could try to get into what do you do with that information that it's different? Do you do anything with it, or do you just knowing it, is that helpful? Okay, so, and then you have another episode, which I don't think I want to get into right now, so I'm going to kind of fast forward a bit. Then we have another subject entrance, this time in the one of the middle voices. Okay. And I should point out that subject entrances sometimes vary by 1 note, and Bach has to do that to make it work harmonically. So whereas the original subject is you go down 1/3 at the beginning, sometimes in order to make it work harmonically, he'll just go down a step. Okay, that is still considered the subject. There's actually a proper term for when it's not exact, and I'm blanking on what it is, but anyway. Okay, now I want to skip forward because I want to make sure I show you all these wonderful things. Here at the bottom of the first page, if you look at this tenor line, all of a sudden we've got quarter notes. Let's listen to these quarter notes, the pitches. familiar? That's the subject, right? But it's twice as slow. So this is called the augmented subject. So it's like Bach just stretches it out, makes it twice as long. Okay? So well, I think you got the idea of the difference in the tempo there, or the difference in the speed of note. What's really cool is look what he does. He puts that against another statement of the subject, this time in the soprano, but that is written in the correct, in the original rhythmic value, right? They're all eighth notes. So you've got this cool effect, goes like this. Isn't that amazing? I think that's pretty cool. And okay, so not only does he do that, you may have seen this. In the middle of this augmented statement of the subject, what do we have here? Let me play this. So the rhythm is the same as the original subject, right? Eighth notes. But listen. This is the inversion, or the flipped on its head version of the subject, okay? It doesn't have that third, because this is the altered version of the subject. I'm trying to think if I can play. Oh, I can't do it. I was going to try to play a subject that's normally written and put it together, but I can't. Okay, so let's hear all that together. Pretty cool, huh? So that's a cool thing to keep your eyes out for. And a lot of times it'll stick out because the rhythm is moving so much more slowly all of a sudden. Okay, then here, starting right after that, we get a new thing to talk about, which I didn't mark, but it's called stretto. So stretto is another important thing in Bach's fugal writing. A stretto is when you have the subject entries, right? And at the beginning, you have a subject entry that's full, and then when that first subject is done, the next subject starts. So it's very polite. Well, a stretto abandons the politeness thing, and what they do is they start to pile them on top of each other or interrupt each other. So you have a subject, and then right after it starts, another one comes in with the subject, and they keep going. So that's what happens here. In the alto voice, it starts it, and then the soprano interrupts, and then the bass, right? So it creates some extra tension, because whereas before the audience is listening along and they're going, ah, yes, there's the subject. Oh, here's the subject. Then all of a sudden you've got the audience going, there's the subject. Wait, there's the subject. Wait, there's the subject. So it heightens one's feeling of intensity and on the edge of their seat. Like, oh my gosh, what's about to happen? Like, this is pure chaos. So it can be kind of a good kind of chaos. It can be kind of fun as they overlap. And then he continues actually that stretto, but he does variation of the subject. So in the soprano, it's kind of a twisted version of the subject. And then also then in stretto, again, while the soprano is doing that, the alto comes in with. Okay, so we've got 2 lines worth of pretty intense stuff going on. So I'm going to start with where that augmented subject comes in earlier. Let's see if I can find it in my music. And I'm going to play through all that stretto stuff. height of all that, I had some wrong notes, sorry about that. At the height, after you've gone through all this toppling, one subject on top of one subject, variations, you arrive at another augmented subject in the bass. Okay, so pretty cool. Then you have an inversion of the subject again in the bass. Then another subject in the bass that's normal. At the end, you get two strettos. So if you listen to these top voices, you'll hear it. And the second voice is going to enter just two on the third note after the subject has started. So pretty cool. And for that last stretto I just showed you, it's all over what's called a pedal tone. So in the bass, you've just kind of got a C underlying everything, which also adds to the tension. It's kind of telling the audience something is coming. All right. I hope that's not like too much information that I just dumped on you. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to play through the entire fugue. Hopefully it'll be a little cleaner. And I just want you to listen for some of these things. It's okay if you don't hear all of them. And I'm going to do my best to bring out those voices. I just want to see if you can hear some of those things sticking out. So especially for strettos and for the augmentation, those are really good things. The inversions are harder to hear. So there you go. There's the C minor fugue. I hope you heard a little bit what's going on there. One point I want to also bring to your attention is that when you're learning a fugue, when you're learning an invention, one of the things that's so important to do is to make sure that you are learning it, and this is going to lead to Hudson's question, I think. You learn it, you have to learn the voices independently. I mean, you have to know them independently, is really what I should say. Because you have to hear those lines and how they're interweaving with one another. Again, it can be very tempting because fugues can get dense to dwell in every note in a vertical way, but we really need to hear these lines in a horizontal way. So just keep that in mind the first time or the next time you get to experience a Bach fugue. All right, I'm looking at Hudson's question. And if anybody else has any questions, this is a good place to do them. Okay, Hudson asks, do you learn and memorize by subject/episode groupings? Or are you more focused on short phrases and note learning? Okay, Hudson, that's a really good question. And the answer is yes to both. Okay, so what I typically do, many of you may already know this about me, I learn everything backwards. And so I learn fugues backwards, kind of phrase by phrase. It's hard with fugues to actually identify phrases because the voices start phrases at different times. But I try to do what I can do. And my chunks when I learn fugues are really, really short because there's so much going on in them. So at first, I don't worry about doing it by subject or by episode. After I've learned all the notes, I try to get through that process as quickly as I can, right? Get fingerings in, make sure I have the right accidentals, right notes. I have a general idea of what's going on. Then I go back. I make sure everything is marked in my score. I know where all the subject entries are. I know where the episodes are. I do a lot of this analysis work, mark it in my music, and then I do, yes, when I go back to do the touch-up stuff and the hard work on it to bring it up to tempo, I often do it by subject entry, by section, that type of thing. I hope that answers your question. If not, just ask me to clarify. Okay. Are there any more questions? I don't see any more questions. So I think what I want to do now to close out our time together is I want to introduce you to another, probably the most phenomenal fugue in this second book. And I want to show you why. Okay, this is his 22nd fugue. It's in B flat minor. If you look here, the subject is really, really long. So let me play that for you first. Okay, I love it. It has that great rising line at the beginning. Actually, it has it in the beginning, right? And then it does again, but goes higher. This actually brings up something I didn't bring up earlier. One thing that I look for whenever I'm playing Bach, or any composer's music for that matter, are hidden scales, okay? Because those can really help you shape things. Like in this third measure, we've got D flat, E flat, F, G flat. If you're really so focused on note by note, you might miss that, but it's really important. So you've got the scale here, and then here. And then it falls back down. Okay, so that's the subject. Now here's what Bach does. This is a 4-page fugue, at least in my edition. In the first section, it's like your normal fugue, right? Okay, you've got the subject here, comes in the alto, you go down farther, comes in on the bass, and then last but not least, it comes in the tenor part, okay? After he does that, and you've got episodes thrown in there too. After he does that, you come to the second section. In the second section, he uses the subject again, but it's in stretto, 2 voices at a time, okay? So starts in the bass, and then it quickly comes in the alto. Then a little episode, then comes in the soprano, quickly followed by an entrance in the bass. All right, so you have 2 of those, and then a lovely episode that's actually really hard to play. Then, the third section, you get the inversion of the subject. So the subject is gone, but now we have the inversion of the subject. So at the beginning, it rises first, right? And then comes back down. Here it goes down and then rises back up. So that's the inversion. And it does the whole subject that way. All right, then you get it, the inversion in the alto, then you get it in the soprano, and then you get it in the bass. So everybody gets to do the inversion. Woohoo! Then the fourth section, guess what? Just like we had near the beginning, you get the stretto of the inversion of the subject. So you have it in the tenor, closely followed by soprano. Then you have alto, closely followed by the bass. All right, so you would think, okay, that's already pretty cool in itself, right? Yeah, this is where you nod your head and say yes. And then you get to the next section, the fifth section. And what does Bach do? Oh, lovely Bach. You have a stretto, but this time, one voice is going to be doing the inversion of the subject, while the other voice in stretto does the original subject. So here's the soprano and tenor together. Really cool. He does that again down here. So he does it a second time, this time between bass and alto. Cool, right? I mean, how does he even make that work out? I have no idea. Then at the very, very end, what he does is he puts everything all together. So you've got stretto between, you've got soprano and alto coming in first, tenor and bass coming in shortly after, a beat after. But the soprano and alto, they are doing the subject, and then the bass and the tenor are doing the inversion of the subject. So it sounds something like this. Let's see. Pretty amazing, I think. So I just wanted to point that one out. Now, we have a couple more minutes. I'm going to ask if there are any more questions. If there are no more questions, I'm going to offer, I think I'm going to regret this, but I could perform this whole B flat minor fugue if you're interested. If you're interested, feel free to write that, and maybe I'll be convinced to do it. But if there are any more questions, anyone? Hudson. Okay, fine. If there are no more questions, I'll go ahead and I'll try to perform it. This is a bear of a fugue. So usually it's one of those ones where if all the stars align, it goes well. But it's you guys. I love you guys. So it's all good, right? You'll still like me even if I crash and burn. So listen in. I guess you kind of can't follow along the score unless you want to go ahead and open the one that I attached to the whole thing, and then you can follow along because it is really a most amazing view. So see if you can keep track of where I am in this whole cycle. All right, let me change the piano screen here. Okay. Oh my gosh. All right. I think my daughter's eating jelly beans. Oh, thank goodness. I'm very possessive of my jelly beans, of our jelly beans. Okay, well, that was a thrilling end to this little session. If you have any more questions, by all means, feel free to email me, or many of you have my, what do you call it, cell phone number. You could text me. So I hope you heard a little bit of exactly what was going on in that last fugue. Thank you for giving me a chance to perform it. And I hope you enjoy Bach. And I hope that you are brave and embrace a Bach fugue soon. All right, take care, everybody. Thanks for joining in. See you later.